Welcome back to another lecture. We are now approaching lecture 7, which will be on strategies at business level. Session 1 will be on Porter's generic strategies. The learning outcomes for the whole lecture will be that in session 1 we look at the different types of generic strategies to understand that Porter distinguishes between cost leadership and differentiation. And he applies this to different situations, which could be the focus strategy, which is on a specific niche market, or you could apply the strategy to a wider mass market. So in the second session, we focus explicitly on the focus strategy. The third session will then look at Miles and Snow framework, which is another framework which also helps identify suitable strategies at business level. So let's start with session 1. So far, we have looked at strategic choices at corporate level. Yeah, we looked at international strategies, we looked at innovation as a strategy. We also looked at different strategic methods and discussed methods such as organic growth, mergers and acquisitions, and strategic alliances. Now, in this lecture, as said, we look at business level strategies. So let's have a look at this difference between corporate level strategies and business level strategies. Corporate level are really strategies that concern the entire organization. So here the top management, the CEO, determines the overall scope of an organization. For example, which markets to compete in and how value is created by the parent company for the organization as a whole. At business level, we are now talking about particular markets. That means we need to identify strategies that help us to remain competitive in the market. When you have a multinational organization and you operate in different geographical markets, each market is different. You have different competitors, you have different customers' expectations, and so these strategies focus more on the local level, if you like, or propose how to be competitive in the specific circumstances of each market. So Michael Porter suggested to the generic strategies. You can see the definition here. It's a basic type of competitive strategy that holds across many kinds of business situations. So he just says such generic strategies, and that's what he observed. The generic strategies mainly focus on cost or cost savings, or they focus on differentiation. He said this is important because you need to create competitive advantage. So he distinguished between competitive strategy, and that's how a strategy is applied to achieve competitive advantage, whatever the business unit or the organization does. And the competitive advantage means you are slightly better than the competition. Yeah, so you have a competitive edge. So the business creates value for users, either based on cost. For example, the advantage comes from supplying products or developing products that are very low in cost and are then superior based on a cost advantage to that of rival firms. In general, he distinguishes 4 different types of strategies. As I said, based on a competitive advantage, it could be either low cost or a differentiation. And in terms of the scope, he distinguishes between whether the organization focuses on a broad market or a narrow market. And based on that, there are 4 different strategies that can result from this. But let's first try to connect this to the 5 forces that we analyzed to determine the attractiveness of the industry, if you remember. That was one of the previous sessions. So he says the nature of the 5 forces determines the choice of strategy. And now if you think about this, that makes sense, because you can, based on the competitive situation, you could, based on what competitors do, whether they go for cost leadership or they differentiate by, for example, focusing on one or some of the critical success factors that we also talked about. Yeah, and so the organization can then decide whether they enter the cost leadership or use the cost leadership approach, or whether they have critical success factors that set them apart from the competition. And then the last area here is whether the organization focuses on a segment or niche, or addresses a mass market. And so we have like 4 different quadrants that result from that. The first one is the cost leadership, which refers to lower cost. Competitive advantage derives from lower cost, but it targets a broad market. Or it could be a niche market where organizations pursue the cost leadership approach, but focus on a very specific market segment, on very specific customers. The differentiation strategy can be applied in the same way, either to the broad market or to focus into a niche market. So we're going to go through all 4 of them to give you a better understanding of what this means. So let's start with cost leadership. Cost leadership really means that organizations aim to become the lowest cost organization in the area of activity. And there are several cost drivers that can help achieve that cost leadership. Porter says if it doesn't make much sense to try to be second or third in terms of lowest cost, because then the competitors can always reduce prices further if they have the cost leadership, which then makes it difficult for our company to be successful in competition. And now, just as a notion of caution here, cost leadership does not automatically imply low prices. Often it does, but it doesn't have to. Depends on the price strategy of the competitors. If there's a similar price and you manage to be the cost leader, your margin will be higher. And so it doesn't have to be necessarily translated to lower prices, or maybe not to the full extent. But let's have a look at the cost drivers that can help achieve cost leadership. In general, literature distinguishes 4 different cost drivers. The first one are the input costs, and they are very important because often, and you know examples of companies that try to reduce the input costs through, for example, using cheap labor or also using cheap raw materials. And so they outsource their production to when they have labor-intensive operations and productions to countries where there's lower labor cost. And so examples might be, for example, call centers in India, which are cheaper, or manufacturing in China, where you can reduce the input cost that way. The second element is the economies of scale, and that refers to how increasing scale usually reduces the average cost of operations. We have, especially when companies have very high fixed cost, then economies of scale are very important, because that means that you spread the fixed costs over a high volume of output, and you try to achieve that, because that is one way of reducing the cost. We see this a lot in research intensive industries such as the pharmaceutical industry, where there's a lot of finances going into research and development. And so through an increased output and an increased volume, the company can benefit from economies of scale and reduce the cost thereby. The third element is the experience. It can really be a key source of cost efficiency as well, because through experience you can reduce the unit cost as well. So experience is usually, the more experience a company has with doing an activity, the better or the more cost efficient they become, because you learn on the way how to optimize the processes. You learn by experience how to become more efficient and faster in your daily routine. As your employees also benefit a lot from experience when they do a job over a longer period of time. Now, the experience curve, as we call it, has some implications on the strategy that companies apply. When you think about, for example, being a first entrant into the market. Yeah, so the earlier you enter the market, the earlier you can build experience. If you wait and you are just a follower, or you don't want to be the first in the market, yeah, so you lose out because you can't build that experience as the other competitors did. Experience usually is also positively related to the market share. Yeah, the bigger the market share, the more experience, the more cumulative experience the company has, just because of the greater volume they produce. And another element is the greater experience because of the cost savings over time. So you can then create greater cost savings when you are more experienced. The last element is the product and process design, because efficiency can be designed when you think about the engineers and whether they design a product that is very slick, and they use cheap components, standardized components, instead of expensive specialized components, for example. Yeah, so, or when organizations interact with customers, so through cheap web-based methods that could also help reduce the cost in terms of the process or the service offered. Yeah, so there are different ways of how to bring the cost down. Overall, as I said, it is important for the company to decide whether they go for the lowest cost, whether they are able to achieve that. Porter advises to do so, because competitors with higher cost than the cost leader are always at risk of being undercut by price. And so, especially when the market is not developing well. So that is a strategy that you need to focus on if you decide to pursue this. And here an overview of the graph that you can see in terms of economies of scale. Once more in the experience curve, now you can see that here with experience the unit cost go down, and the higher the input, that's the idea. So then the unit cost gets reduced. So that is economies of scale effective here, and also in terms of the experience, as we said. So each unit of output leads to a reduction of unit costs because of the experience gained. Should the organization decide to go for cost leadership, it has significant implications for the value chain. Remember, we covered the value chain when we analyzed the internal environment and looked at the resources and looked also at activities. Remember, the value chain consists of primary activities. These are those that are directly related to the production or the development of a product and a service, and the support or the secondary activities that need to be there in order for the first or the primary activities to work well. So when we look at the inbound logistics here, for example, where it says cost and reliability, you bring the cost down, as we said, through sourcing cheap raw material or having cheap labor as a workforce, and it reduces the cost significantly. When we look at the operations for developing or manufacturing a product or a service, yeah, so you then need to have very smooth processes in place. Everything is based on functionality, yeah, so and efficiency. When we then look at the outbound logistics, you outsource as much as you can, for example, the storage, but also maybe the distribution to the customers or to the retailers. And also in terms of the marketing and sales activities, as you try to reach the customer by offering promotions or making special offers that help gain wider market share, but at a low cost. Call centers, we mentioned before, as an example, to again reduce the cost, so you don't have that full package of customer service or after sales service that you would maybe normally expect if you buy a premium product, for example. The same for the secondary activities. We have here implications on the systems, processes, routines in place. So here's about exploitation, so using what you have instead of exploration. Exploration would mean you look into new ideas, try to develop the product further, invest in research and development. You don't do this when you are fully focused on cost leadership. Here it's really about exploiting information, getting data about the customer, so to have a more to reduce the cost as much as possible. Top-down management is said to help as well, because you don't have very democratic style of leadership, but more an autocratic, without much discussion, with negotiation or agreement. So here the processes are streamlined also in terms of decision making. When we then look at technologies that are in place to promote economies of scale, as you try to use automation, for example, as much as possible, to reduce the cost-intensive labor or workforce, and try to bring in technology as much as you can. And also here, centralized tendering helps for lowering costs, because then the purchasing power is increased. So you centralize as much as possible, because then you standardize the processes and you can also increase your power when negotiating and making, for example, or developing proposals. So all of the activities of the value chain have to be adjusted if the company wants to go for cost leadership. Let's look at the other strategy that Porter suggests, and that is called differentiation. So it's not to be confused with diversification. That was one of the growth strategies, if you remember. Here, differentiation is about to be different. So by offering unique attributes as part of the product or the service, and that are not offered by competitors, but that are valued by customers. So I've given you here some examples. When you look at Apple's strategy is clearly at differentiation, because their features are different. The high customer value is what they pursue, and then a premium price. So that is the implication. If you offer a product that is very different and stands out, you can ask for a higher price. So let's have a look at how differentiation is achieved. We have talked about the critical success factors, if you remember, and based on that we identify areas of blue oceans and red ocean. So maybe if you remember when we did the competitor analysis or the industry analysis and then the competitor analysis. So that is here the same idea, to look at what is valued by the customer, for example, in terms of quality, or brand image, or in terms of reliability. When you think of some cars, I think Volvo is said to be a very reliable family car. That is maybe not a feature that you would associate with a sports car. Then you would go maybe for image or for performance. So different features might matter to different customers, and you need to find out what is it that they want, and are they ready to pay a premium price for that special feature. So differentiation strategies involves the uniqueness. The question is, what is the customer ready to pay? So what does the customer value, as we said? So what is the differentiation that they expect? But also, are they willing to pay that high price for this? Or would they go to the competitors? Because if competitors see that a special feature like reliability or quality, or in terms of storage, when you think of the smartphone or whatever it might be, quality of camera, so competitors might follow suit. So they will become a rival, offering very similar features and similar products. And so companies need to be aware of the risk associated with that strategy, that the unique element is not enough valued by customers to start with to justify the price, and competitors find a way to copy the features or even improve the features. So, and then you need to be really focused on the uniqueness of the feature and whether it still holds over time. And when we look at the value chain for differentiation, you can compare it with the value chain for cost leadership. It looks quite different, and it has to, because here you go for special features, that, for example, high quality price and high quality product. So you need to offer the customers maybe a better service or better production processes, quality management checks, and so on, so that you look for opportunities to differentiate the product further. And so that again goes through the primary activities as well as the secondary activities. And maybe you can find examples for each of the different activities to apply it to the differentiation strategy. Thank you for now.